They told everyone I failed. I didn't argue, I just left. Maybe you've done the same. I'm sitting in my car outside Fort Campbell right now, watching officers in dress blues file into the ceremony hall. The parking lot is full of family members clutching programs and adjusting their ties. Nobody's looking for me. Nobody expects me to be here. My name is Rachel Quinn. I'm the second daughter of the Quinn family Air Force legacy, small town Tennessee. 3 generations of uniforms hanging in our hallway closet. 3 generations of medals gathering dust on the mantle. They see me as the one who broke the mold. Or just broke. But what they never knew was that I didn't vanish. I was pulled away into something they weren't allowed to know. And when I came back, they'd already written me out. The steering wheel is warm under my palms. Through the windshield, I can see my younger sister Abby stepping out of a black sedan, her Lieutenant Colonel bars catching the afternoon light. She moves like she owns the air around her, confident, celebrated, everything I was supposed to be. Inside that building, she's about to give a speech about perseverance and dedication, about staying the course when others quit. She doesn't know I'm here. None of them do. I've been invisible for so long, I almost forgot what it felt like to take up space. My phone buzzes. A text from my mother. Don't embarrass her today. Not, we're glad you're coming, or we've missed you. Just a warning wrapped in politeness. I turn off the engine and sit in the silence. The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. I could drive away right now, pull back onto the highway and disappear again. It would be easier. But I'm tired of easy. For 15 years I've lived in the shadows of classified operations and redacted reports. I've made decisions that saved lives and cost others. I've stood in rooms where the wrong word could topple governments. But the hardest room I've ever had to enter, the one filled with my own family. They think I quit West Point because I couldn't handle the pressure. They think I washed out, failed, gave up. The truth is buried in files they'll never see, marked with classifications they'll never understand. But today, truth has a way of surfacing, whether you're ready or not. I check my reflection in the rearview mirror. The face staring back at me is older than I remember. Lines around my eyes from too many sunrises in places that don't exist on maps. A mouth that's learned to stay closed, even when silence costs everything. But my eyes, they're still sharp, still watching, still here. The guest room where I'll sleep tonight smells like lavender and disappointment. The same room where I packed my bags 15 years ago, thinking I'd be back for Christmas. I never made it back for Christmas. If this feels familiar, if you've ever sat in the back row of your own life, maybe you'll understand what comes next. Maybe you've been the one they stopped talking about, the one whose chair at the dinner table got reassigned to someone else's success story. If you're still listening, thank you. That matters more than you know. I'm about to walk into a room full of people who buried me before I was dead. They'll see me and remember why they stopped looking. But today, I'm not here to make them comfortable. I'm not here to apologize for the space I never got to occupy. I'm here because sometimes the only way to stop being invisible is to show up exactly as you are. The ceremony hall doors are heavy, solid oak with brass handles that reflect the Tennessee sky. Behind those doors, my sister is about to tell a room full of decorated officers how important it is to stay committed to the mission. She doesn't know that I never left mine. I pull the keys from the ignition and drop them into my pocket. The metal is cold against my fingers. Time to go. If you've ever wondered what happens when a ghost walks back into the light, stay with me. Because what happens next changes everything. The Quinn house always smelled like brass polish and expectation. Growing up, our living room was a shrine to service. My father's medals lined the mantle in perfect formation: Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Distinguished Flying Cross. Each one earned through blood and sky, each one a silent lecture about what it meant to serve with honor. Colonel Michael Quinn didn't just wear his rank, he breathed it into the walls of our home. My mother, Sarah, had her own quiet war stories. Combat medic in Desert Storm, she'd saved lives in triage tents, while mortars fell like rain. She didn't talk about it much, but sometimes I'd catch her staring at her hands, remembering what they'd done when everything was falling apart. We were raised on base protocol, dinner at 1800 hours, beds made with hospital corners. Yes, sir, no, sir. And never leave a man behind, even if that man was your little sister who couldn't reach the top shelf. Jake, my older brother, was born to fly. By 16, he was already talking about the Air Force Academy, already dreaming of F-16s and combat missions. He had that golden boy swagger that made adults nod approvingly and say things like, "That kid's going places." When he graduated from the academy, the local paper ran a full-page story. "Local hero takes flight," the headline read. Mom framed it. Abby came along when I was 7, and from the moment she could walk, she was performing. School plays science fair's student council president 3 years running. She had this way of lighting up a room just by entering it. Dad would beam when she won awards, and Mom would post pictures on the refrigerator like trophies. And then there was me, Rachel, the middle child who kept everyone's secrets and nobody's attention. I wasn't the pilot or the performer. I was the one who helped Jake study for his entrance exams and stayed up late helping Abby with her campaign speeches. I was steady, reliable. Background music while the real show happened around me, but I was watching. Always watching. I noticed things others missed: the way Dad's jaw tightened when he read casualty reports, the way Mom's hands shook the first time she had to give a vaccine to a screaming child at the base clinic. I saw the weight they carried and somehow understood that carrying weight was what love looked like in our family. When my West Point acceptance letter arrived, it was the first time I remember the house going completely quiet. Not because they were disappointed, but because they were surprised. As if they'd forgotten I was capable of surprises. The celebration was small but real. Dad shook my hand like I was already an officer. Mom cried the first time I'd seen her cry since Jake's deployment to Afghanistan. Even Abby, 13, and usually too cool for family moments, hugged me tight and whispered, "You're gonna be amazing." For exactly 3 months, I was the story they told. "Rachel's at West Point," Dad would say to his retired military friends at the VFW, following in the family tradition. It felt like sunlight after years of standing in someone else's shadow. Then came the call. It was October of my first year. I was in my dorm room struggling through advanced calculus when my tactical officer knocked on the door. "Cadet Quinn, you have a visitor." The man waiting in the conference room didn't look like military. Gray suit, forgettable face, the kind of person who could disappear in a crowd without trying. He introduced himself as Mr. Thompson from the Department of Defense Special Projects Division. "We've been watching you," he said, sliding a thin folder across the table. "Your psych evaluations, your aptitude scores, your background checks. You have a rare combination of analytical thinking and emotional control. We have a proposition." The folder contained documents I couldn't fully understand, references to intelligence gathering, overseas assignments, operations that existed in the spaces between what the public knew and what the government needed done. "If you accept," Thompson continued, "you'll complete a specialized training program. Your official record will show that you left West Point for personal reasons. Your family will be told you couldn't adapt to the academic rigor. It's a hardcover, but it's necessary." I was 18 years old. I thought I understood what sacrifice meant. "What about my family?" I asked. "They can't know, ever. This program doesn't exist. You'll disappear from their lives for as long as it takes to complete your missions. Years, maybe decades. When you're done, if you're done, you can try to find your way back. But there are no guarantees they'll still be waiting." I stared at the papers, thinking about the metal case in our living room, about the pride in Dad's voice, when he told people about West Point, about Abby's hug, and her whispered words of encouragement. "I need to think about it," I said. Thompson nodded. "You have 24 hours. After that, the offer disappears." I didn't sleep that night. I walked the campus grounds past the monuments to duty and honor, past the chapel where cadets prayed for strength and wisdom. I thought about Jake in his cockpit, about Abby's future acceptance speeches, about the empty space I'd leave behind if I vanished. But I also thought about the weight I'd seen in my parents' eyes, the price of the freedom everyone else took for granted. Someone had to carry that weight. Someone had to stand in the shadows so others could live in the light. The next morning, I signed the papers. Within a week, I was gone. The official story was that I'd had a breakdown during finals week. Couldn't handle the pressure. Quit before they could kick me out. The shame was immediate and complete. No one asked for details. No one pushed for the truth. They just accepted that I'd failed and moved on. The last thing they gave me after 6 months of training in a facility that didn't exist was a folded American flag. Not for a funeral, but for a kind of death. The death of Rachel Quinn, the daughter. The birth of Rachel Quinn, the ghost. I kept that flag in the bottom drawer of every temporary home I've had since. A reminder of what I gave up and what I became. Sometimes I'd take it out and hold it, wondering if the trade was worth it, wondering if invisibility was just another word for erasure. Today, sitting in this parking lot, I can feel the weight of that flag, even though it's 300 miles away in my apartment. Some truths are too heavy to carry and too important to put down. The ceremony is about to start. Time to find out if 15 years of silence was enough, or if some voices are meant to stay buried forever. For 15 years, I built a whole life around silence, and they filled it in with their own words. My apartment in Arlington sits in a row of identical townhouses, the kind of neighborhood where everyone waves, but no one asks questions. Perfect for someone who needs to blend in. Perfect for someone who officially doesn't exist. I work under the name Rebecca Miller for Sentinel Defense Solutions, a contractor that handles logistics for operations the government prefers to keep at arm's length. My business cards say, Risk Assessment Analyst. My neighbors think I analyze insurance claims. The reality is messier. Sometimes I spend weeks in a windowless room connecting dots between financial transfers and weapons shipments. Sometimes I brief officials whose names I'm not allowed to remember. Sometimes I sit in on video calls where people discuss problems that won't make the evening news. 3 years ago, my identity was partially declassified under a controlled civilian clearance. That means I'm allowed to be seen again. To speak my name, wear my own face. But the missions, the names, the directives, the reasons I disappeared, those are still buried in black folders with classifications that will outlive me. I consult sometimes off the record, but mostly I live quietly. No medals, no flag. Just enough clearance to know when the lights go out before the public ever notices. You ever come home and still feel like you're hiding? That's what declassified looks like. My days follow a rhythm. Coffee at 5:30, news briefings at 6. Gym at 7 when it's empty except for the early shift workers who don't make conversation. Work by 8:30 analyzing threat assessments and writing reports that 3 people will read and no one will remember. Evenings are the hardest. That's when the silence gets loud. I keep a small photo on my kitchen counter, the last family picture that included me. We're all squeezed together on the front porch of the house in Tennessee. Everyone in their dress uniforms except Mom, who's wearing her best blue dress. I'm standing slightly behind Jake, barely visible except for my face peeking over his shoulder. I look at that photo every night while I eat dinner alone, wondering if they still gather like that. Wondering if they notice the empty space where I used to stand. The call came on a Tuesday. I was reviewing satellite images of a supply route in Eastern Europe when my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in 6 months. Rachel. Mom's voice sounded exactly the same, crisp, efficient, like she was checking items off a list. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. I minimized the classified document on my screen. No, Mom. Just work stuff. Good. I'm calling about Abby's promotion ceremony next month. She's making lieutenant colonel. We're having a family gathering afterward. A pause. You should come. Should. Not we'd love to have you or we've missed you. Should like an obligation no one particularly wanted to fulfill. Of course, I said. I wouldn't miss it. Good. It's at Fort Campbell. The ceremony's at 1400 hours reception afterward. Try not to draw attention, okay? This is Abby's day. Try not to draw attention, as if I'd spent the last 15 years practicing how to be invisible and might suddenly forget. I understand, I said. Oh, and Rachel, wear something appropriate. Not too formal, not too casual. You know how these things are. I wanted to tell her that I'd attended more military ceremonies than she could imagine, that I'd sat in rooms with generals and ambassadors, that I'd worn dress blues in situations where lives hung in the balance. Instead, I said, I'll figure something out. All right then, I'll send you the details. See you there. The line went dead. No, how are you? No, what have you been up to? No curiosity about the life I'd built in the space they'd forgotten about me. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling something crack open in my chest. Not the words she'd said, but the complete absence of everything she hadn't. That night, I pulled out the folded flag from my bottom drawer. The fabric was still crisp, still carried the weight of everything I'd given up. I held it against the window, watching the streetlights filter through the red, white, and blue. 15 years of silence. 15 years of Christmas cards sent to a P.O. box of birthday calls that went straight to voicemail of existing in the margins of their stories. They'd written me out so completely that even my return felt like an intrusion. But maybe that was about to change. I folded the flag carefully and placed it back in the drawer. Next to it, I kept a single challenge coin from an operation I'd never be able to discuss. 2 tokens of a life lived in the spaces between truth and secrecy. In 3 weeks, I'd walk into that ceremony hall. I'd sit quietly in the back, watch Abby receive her promotion, and try not to draw attention to myself. I'd be the dutiful older sister who'd learned her place. The question was, would they finally see me, or would I remain invisible, even when I was standing right in front of them? Some questions can only be answered by showing up. And after 15 years of disappearing, I was finally ready to be seen. The drive to Clarksville takes 4 hours through rolling Tennessee hills that look exactly the same as they did 15 years ago. Same weathered barns, same faded billboards advertising truck stops and Jesus. Same exit ramp that leads to Fort Campbell, where my childhood sits preserved like a museum display I'm no longer part of. I pull into the driveway of the house where I learned to march before I could properly walk. The white colonial with black shutters hasn't changed. Same American flag hanging from the porch. Same manicured lawn that Dad edges with military precision every Saturday morning. My rental car looks out of place next to Jake's pickup truck and Abby's sleek sedan. I sit for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, watching shadows move behind the curtained windows. Voices carry through the glass, animated conversation punctuated by laughter, the sound of a family that learned to function perfectly well without me. I grab my overnight bag and walk to the front door. Before I can knock, it opens. Mom stands in the doorway wearing her best dress, the navy blue one she reserves for military functions. Her hair is styled, her makeup carefully applied. She looks me up and down, wants a quick assessment, then steps aside without a word. "You'll sleep in the guest room," she says, already turning away. "Don't bring up the past tomorrow. Today is about Abby's achievement. Not hello, not how was your drive. Just instructions delivered like a briefing to a subordinate who might not follow orders properly." "Understood," I reply, because that's the language that works in this house. The guest room used to be my bedroom. Now it's been transformed into something sterile and impersonal. Beige walls, generic artwork, a bed that looks like it came from a hotel catalog. The only remnant of my childhood is a single photo on the nightstand, tucked behind a lamp where guests might not notice it. Me at 17 in my high school graduation gown, smiling like I believed the future was something I could control. I unpack carefully, hanging my clothes in the closet that once held my teenage dreams. At the bottom of my bag, wrapped in tissue paper, is something I haven't looked at in years, my old field uniform. The one I was issued during training, but never got to wear officially. It's still crisp, still carries the faint smell of the supply warehouse, where it waited for a ceremony that never came. I hold it up to the light, running my fingers over the empty name tape where Quinn should have been embroidered. The fabric is unmarked by rank or decoration, a uniform for a soldier who never officially existed. "Maybe this time they'll see me," I whisper to the empty room. Dinner is served at exactly 1800 hours, just like always. The dining room table is set with Mom's good china, the kind she uses when Dad's old military friends come over. Jake sits to Dad's right, Abby to his left. I'm placed at the far end next to the serving dishes, where I can be useful without being central to conversation. The talk flows around me like water around a stone. Jake's latest promotion, Abby's upcoming assignment to the Pentagon, Dad's new position with the Veterans Affairs Advisory Board, accomplishments that fit neatly into newspaper announcements and Christmas card updates. "So Rachel," says Linda, one of Mom's friends from the Officers' Wives Club, "what exactly do you do now? Sarah mentioned you work in administration." The table goes quiet. All eyes turn to me, waiting for the explanation that will let them categorize and dismiss me. "Risk assessment," I say simply. "For a defense contractor." "Oh, how nice." Linda continues with the kind of bright tone people use when they're trying to find something positive to say about nothing. "So you work in admin now, huh? Good for you. Steady work is important." Tom, her husband, nods approvingly. "Not everyone's cut out for the big leagues. Nothing wrong with finding your level." I take a sip of water and say nothing. Dignity through silence is a skill I learned in rooms where the wrong word could start wars. Abby speaks without looking at me directly. "I think it's important to recognize that different people have different thresholds. Some people take the easy way out when things get challenging. Some stay and earn it." She cuts her roast beef with surgical precision. Both choices have consequences. The words hang in the air like smoke from a controlled burn. Everyone knows exactly who she's talking about, but no one acknowledges it directly. That's how conversations work in military families, truth delivered through subtext wounds inflicted with plausible deniability. Jake shifts uncomfortably in his chair. Dad focuses intently on his meal. Mom refills wine glasses that don't need refilling. I could respond. I could tell them about the 16-hour days in Syrian safe houses, about the intelligence networks I've helped build and dismantle, about the operations that kept their comfortable lives possible. I could explain that my easy way out involved sacrificing everything they thought mattered, so I could protect everything that actually did. Instead, I smile slightly and say, "You're absolutely right, Abby. Consequences matter." She glances at me sharply, maybe expecting more fight, but I just return to my dinner. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. After dessert, I excuse myself and retreat to the guest room. Through the thin walls, I can hear them continue their celebration without me. Voices relax now that the uncomfortable presence has removed itself. I sit on the edge of the bed, holding that field uniform in my hands. Tomorrow, Abby will stand in front of hundreds of people and receive recognition for her service. She'll be celebrated, photographed, remembered. And I'll sit in the back row, invisible as always, carrying secrets that would reshape everything they think they know about duty and sacrifice. But maybe secrets have a way of surfacing when you least expect them to. I fold the uniform carefully and place it in the closet. Tomorrow's ceremony is in 12 hours. Time to find out if 15 years of invisibility ends with recognition or if some ghosts are meant to stay buried forever. The ceremony hall at Fort Campbell holds 300 people when it's full. Today it's packed beyond capacity with folding chairs squeezed into every available space and uniforms pressed shoulder to shoulder like a field of blue and brass. I slip in through the back entrance 15 minutes after the official start time when the opening remarks are already underway. No one turns to look. No one saves me a seat. I find an empty chair in the last row, wedged between a junior officer's wife and someone's elderly father who keeps checking his watch. From here I can see everything and be seen by no one. The perfect vantage point for someone who's spent 15 years perfecting the art of invisibility. The stage is draped in red, white, and blue bunting, with the American flag standing at attention to the left of the podium. Behind it, a banner reads, "Excellence in Leadership," promoting tomorrow's commanders today. The kind of language that sounds important and means nothing. Abby sits in the front row with the other honorees, her posture perfect, her uniform immaculate. She's learned to carry herself like someone who belongs in rooms like this, someone who earned her place through merit and dedication. Someone who never quit when things got difficult. The base chaplain delivers an opening prayer about service and sacrifice. A colonel I don't recognize reads citations for valor and leadership. Everything proceeds with the mechanical precision of military ceremony, each moment choreographed to reinforce the idea that what we're witnessing matters. Then it's Abby's turn. She approaches the podium with confident strides, her speech folded neatly in her left hand. The microphone squeals briefly as she adjusts it. Then her voice fills the hall clear and commanding. "Distinguished guests, fellow officers, family members," she begins. "Today I stand before you not just as someone receiving a promotion, but as someone who has learned what it truly means to serve." Applause ripples through the audience. In the front row, Mom beams with pride. Dad sits ramrod straight, his chest swelling with each word his daughter speaks. Throughout my career, Abby continues, I've watched people face the same choice we all face in uniform. Do we stay when things get difficult? Or do we walk away? Do we honor our commitments? Or do we take the easy path when no one's watching? Her eyes scan the room as she speaks, but she doesn't look toward the back, doesn't acknowledge the rows of family members who came to support her. She's performing now, and the performance requires a certain kind of blindness. I've seen both choices, she says, her voice gaining strength. I've seen people who quit at the first sign of adversity, who abandon their posts and their responsibilities, because they decided the cost was too high. These people often disappear from our lives entirely, leaving others to carry the burden they couldn't bear. The words hit like artillery fire, precisely targeted and devastatingly effective. Several people in the audience nod approvingly. Someone whispers, "That's right," under their breath. But I've also seen people who stay, Abby continues, who understand that true honor comes not from running away from difficulty, but from running toward it, who recognize that service isn't a job you can quit, it's a calling you either answer or you don't. More applause. Louder this time. The audience is fully engaged now, caught up in the narrative of perseverance and dedication that makes everyone feel better about their own choices. I sit perfectly still, watching my sister deliver a speech that erases me from the story of our family, while simultaneously using my absence to elevate herself. It's masterfully done, I have to admit. Every word carefully chosen to draw the brightest possible line between those who serve with honor and those who don't. The uniform we wear, Abby says, building toward her conclusion, represents something larger than ourselves. It represents the unbroken chain of service that connects us to every soldier, sailor, airman, and marine who came before us and everyone who will come after. When we break that chain through cowardice or weakness, we don't just fail ourselves. We fail everyone who depends on us too. Excuse me, the voice cuts through Abby's speech like a knife through silk. Everyone turns toward the side entrance where a figure in dress blues has just entered the hall. General Harrison, the base commander, strides down the center aisle with purpose. He's a tall man with silver hair and the kind of presence that makes rooms reorganize themselves around him. His eyes are scanning the audience, searching for something specific. Abby falters at the podium, her speech hanging incomplete in the air. "Sir, I was just—" Continue, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison says without looking at her. His gaze sweeps across the back rows, methodical and intent. Then he stops. His eyes lock onto mine. For a moment that stretches like a held breath, we simply look at each other. Recognition dawns across his face, followed by something that might be surprise, then something that definitely is respect. The entire hall watches as General Harrison changes direction, walking directly toward the back row where I sit. Conversations die. Programs stop rustling. Even the air conditioning seems to quiet down. He stops directly in front of my chair. The elderly man next to me shrinks back as if a lightning bolt has just struck the ground beside him. "Ma'am," General Harrison says, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, "you're Rachel Quinn. The Quinn from Operation Pylon Echo." 300 people freeze. Every head in the room turns toward me. I can feel the weight of their stares, the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure that happens when everyone realizes the script has changed. At the podium, Abby's face has gone pale. Her speech slides from her fingers and drifts to the floor like a fallen leaf. I stand slowly, feeling 15 years of invisibility crack and fall away like old paint. "Yes, sir," I say clearly. "I am." General Harrison's hand snaps up in a textbook salute, sharp and precise, and utterly unmistakable in its meaning. "Ma'am," he says, his voice carrying the kind of respect usually reserved for the dead, "it's an honor." The silence that follows is so complete I can hear my own heartbeat. Then, like ripples spreading across still water, whispers begin to move through the crowd. "Wait, she was there. Operation Pylon Echo. Wasn't that the one in Syria? I thought that was classified." "She's been here the whole time." I return General Harrison's salute with the same precision he offered me. Not because I need his validation, but because he deserves the respect of someone who understands what that salute means. "Thank you, sir," I say, simply. He nods once, then turns and walks back toward the stage, leaving me standing in the back row while 300 people try to reconcile the woman they've been ignoring with the woman their commanding general just honored. At the podium, Abby stares at me with an expression I can't quite read. Shock, maybe. Or recognition of a different kind, the sudden understanding that the story she's been telling about our family might not be the only story worth telling. I sit back down quietly, my hands steady in my lap. I don't elaborate. I don't explain. I don't try to reclaim the narrative that's been built around my absence. Sometimes the most powerful truth is the one that speaks for itself. The ceremony continues, but the energy has shifted. Everyone is looking at me now, trying to solve the puzzle of who I am and why a general would salute me in front of God and country. For the first time in 15 years, I'm not invisible, and I'm not sure any of us are ready for what comes next. The reception ends at 2100 hours, but the conversations continue long after the last piece of cake is served. I watch from the edges as officers and their families cluster around Abby, offering congratulations that feel different. Now more careful, more curious. Everyone wants to know about her mysterious sister, the one who rates a salute from the base commander. I slip out during the handshaking and photo-taking, walking back to the guest quarters where I can finally breathe without feeling like I'm performing. The night air is cool against my face, carrying the familiar sense of Tennessee honeysuckle and cut grass, and the faint diesel smell that clings to every military installation. I'm sitting on the small porch outside my temporary room when I hear footsteps on the gravel path. Measured, purposeful. Someone who knows exactly where they're going and why. Abby appears in the circle of lamplight still wearing her dress uniform, but with her jacket unbuttoned and her hair slightly mussed from the evening's festivities. She looks younger somehow, less polished than she did at the podium. "We need to talk," she says. I don't stand up. "Okay." She paces in front of me for a moment, her hands clenched at her sides. When she finally speaks, her voice is tight with barely controlled anger. "Why didn't you warn me?" "Warn you about what? About who you are? About what you've done? About the fact that I was about to give a speech about quitters and failures in front of someone who—" She stops struggling for words. "God, Rachel, do you have any idea how that looked?" I lean back in the plastic chair studying her face in the lamplight. "How did it look? Like I was talking about you? Like I was calling you a coward and a quitter when apparently you're—" Another pause. "What exactly are you? What's Operation Pylon Echo? Why does General Harrison know your name?" "You were too loud to hear me," I say quietly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I tried to tell you, Abby, not directly because I couldn't. But I tried. All those Christmas cards I sent from Maryland. All those birthday calls that went to voicemail. All those times I asked how you were doing and you never asked back." I shake my head. "You were so busy being right about my failures that you never wondered if you might be wrong." She stops pacing and stares at me. I let you believe what you wanted to believe. There's a difference." The anger in her eyes flickers, replaced by something more complex. Hurt, maybe, or recognition of a truth she's not ready to face. I reach into my jacket pocket and pull out a folded piece of paper. "Speaking of things you wanted to believe," I say, unfolding it carefully. "I got this about 6 months ago. Someone tried to leak information about classified operations I was involved in. False information designed to make me look reckless, dangerous." I hold the paper out to her. She takes it reluctantly, her eyes scanning the text. "The language is interesting," I continue. "Very specific word choices. Abandoned her post. Couldn't handle the pressure. Took the easy way out. Sound familiar?" Her face goes pale as she reads. The paper trembles slightly in her hands. "Was this you?" I ask, my voice still calm, still quiet. She doesn't answer immediately. The silence stretches between us like a chasm filled with 15 years of resentment and misunderstanding. Finally, she whispers, "I didn't mean for it to go that far. The words hang in the air, incomplete but damning. I watch her face crumble as she realizes what she's just admitted. When she speaks again, her voice is barely audible. "I remember being 11 watching you open your West Point acceptance letter. Mom cried. Dad told everyone at church. That same week I won the district science fair. No one noticed. No one even mentioned it at dinner." She looks up at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I got used to fading out when you were in the room. Even after you left, especially after you left, you were still the ghost at every family gathering. The one who got away. The one who broke Dad's heart. I thought if I could just prove that you weren't the hero everyone remembered, maybe they'd finally see me." The confession hits harder than any accusation could have. I see her now not as the confident officer who gave that speech, but as the little girl who stood in my shadow for so long, she forgot how to step into the light on her own. I don't say anything. Some wounds don't need salt, they just need silence to remind you they're still there. "I sent one email," she continues, her voice breaking, "to some military blogger who claimed he exposed corruption. I thought maybe if people knew you quit, if they knew you weren't perfect, it would level the playing field. I never thought I didn't know it would turn into something bigger. I didn't know someone else would pick it up and run with it." "But you didn't stop it either," I say, still calm. "No." She folds the paper carefully and hands it back to me. "I didn't stop it." We sit in silence for a long moment, the weight of her admission settling between us like smoke. Somewhere in the distance, I can hear the sound of taps being played, the mournful notes drifting across the bass, like a prayer for the dead. "What happens now?" she asks finally. I fold the paper and put it back in my pocket. Now you live with it, just like I've been living with the consequences of your choices for the past 6 months. She nods, accepting the verdict without argument. I'm sorry, Rachel. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. I look at my sister, really look at her, and see someone who's been fighting the wrong war for most of her life. Someone who thought she had to tear me down to build herself up. I know you are, I say. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The call came at 0500 hours, 3 days after Abby's ceremony. I was in my Arlington apartment drinking coffee and reviewing threat assessments for a client in the Balkans, when my secure phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in 2 years. Ms. Miller, the voice said, using my civilian alias. This is Agent Thompson, Defense Intelligence Agency. We need to speak with you immediately. My coffee went cold in my hands. What's this regarding? There's been a breach, high-level classified materials related to your former operations. We'll send a car. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, feeling the familiar weight of dread settle in my chest. In my world, urgent calls at dawn rarely brought good news. 40 minutes later, I sat in a windowless conference room at the Pentagon, facing 3 people in expensive suits and carefully neutral expressions. Agent Thompson, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes like a hawk. Director Coleman, whose reputation for ruthlessness preceded him into every room he entered, and a younger man whose nameplate read Analyst Morrison, but whose bearing screamed Special Operations. They said it was just a routine inquiry. But I saw the way Thompson looked at me, not like a hero, like a question mark. I've been hunted across enemy borders, questioned by warlords, shot at in desert winds. But this quiet suspicion from the people I once bled for, this was the hardest room I've ever had to walk into. 3 days ago, Thompson began sliding a tablet across the table. Someone leaked classified intelligence about Operation Pylon Echo, detailed mission parameters, casualty reports, tactical decisions, information that could compromise ongoing operations and endanger assets still in the field. I scrolled through the leaked documents on the screen. My throat tightened as I recognized my own after-action reports, classified assessments I'd written in the aftermath of missions that officially never happened. The leak originated from an encrypted server. Coleman added, his voice flat and professional. Someone with intimate knowledge of the operation, someone who was there. The implication hung in the air like smoke from a controlled burn. I was one of only 4 people who had access to these particular files. 2 were dead. 1 was sitting in federal prison on unrelated charges. That left me. I understand you were recently in contact with family members, Morrison said, consulting his notes, including a confrontation with your sister regarding a previous attempt to discredit your service record. It wasn't the accusation that hurt. It was realizing they believed I was capable of it. You think I leaked classified information to get back at my sister? I asked quietly. We think someone with a personal grudge might have used recent family tensions as cover for a more serious breach, Thompson replied. The timing is convenient. I leaned back in my chair, studying their faces. These were professionals who'd made careers out of reading people, but they were missing something fundamental. The leak wasn't about family drama. It was too sophisticated, too targeted. Someone was using Abby's misstep as camouflage for a much larger operation. I need to see the full forensic analysis, I said. Coleman's eyebrows rose slightly. You're not in a position to make demands, Ms. Miller. Actually, I am. I pulled out my phone and showed them my current clearance status. Controlled Civilian Classification Level 7. I have authorization to review materials related to my former operations, especially when those operations have been compromised. They exchanged glances. Thompson tapped something into her tablet, then nodded grudgingly. Fine, but you'll work under supervision. And if we find evidence that you're involved in this breach, you won't, I said simply, because I didn't do it. The next 6 hours were spent in a digital forensics lab that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Banks of servers hummed quietly, while specialists traced the leaked documents through layers of encryption and proxy servers. What we found was troubling. The breach was more extensive than they'd initially realized. It wasn't just Operation Pylon Echo. Someone had systematically accessed classified files from 7 different operations spanning a decade of covert work. The hacker had been patient, methodical, extracting information over a period of months, without triggering security protocols. But they'd made one mistake. In their haste to cover their tracks after the pylon echo leak, they'd used a routing protocol I recognized. It was a signature technique, a specific way of bouncing signals through international servers that only one person I knew favored: Marcus Webb. Marcus had been part of my team during 3 operations in the Middle East. Brilliant analyst, phenomenal with digital intelligence, and absolutely eaten alive by resentment when I was promoted to team leader over him. He'd been reassigned after filing complaints about my reckless decision-making and inability to follow proper protocols. The complaints had been investigated and dismissed, but Marcus never forgave me for what he saw as a career-ending slight. When he left the agency 2 years ago, his exit interview had been filled with barely concealed bitterness about political promotions and unqualified commanders. I pulled up his file and cross-referenced his known associates. There it was, a connection to the military blogger, who'd received Abby's original tip about my service record. Marcus had used my sister's amateur attempt at character assassination as the perfect cover story for his own systematic betrayal of classified operations. He's been planning this for months, I told Thompson, pointing to the digital trail on the screen. Abby's email gave him the opening he needed. While everyone was focused on family drama, he was extracting files from operations he'd worked on years ago. Can you prove it? I scrolled through the forensic data, highlighting the routing signatures and cross-referencing them with Marcus's known techniques. Give me access to his current location data, and I can prove it within hours. Coleman leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing? Let me run the investigation. I know Marcus better than anyone else in this room. I know how he thinks, how he operates, what mistakes he's likely to make. And I have personal motivation to stop him before he compromises more operations. Personal motivation could also mean personal vendetta, Morrison pointed out. Personal motivation means I won't stop until I find him, I replied. Your choice is simple. Let me help catch the real leak, or waste time investigating someone who's been trying to protect these operations for 15 years. Thompson and Coleman exchanged another look. Some conversations happen in glances between professionals who've worked together long enough to read each other's minds. Finally, Coleman nodded. You'll have limited access and full supervision. But if you can trace this back to Webb with actionable evidence, we'll consider reinstating your operational clearance. I felt something shift inside my chest. Not relief, but recognition. For the first time since I'd been declassified, someone was asking me to do what I did best: hunt down threats and neutralize them. I'll need 48 hours, I said. You'll have 24, I smiled grimly. That'll be enough. Marcus Webb had spent 2 years planning his revenge against me, but he'd made one critical error. He'd forgotten that I'd spent 15 years learning how to find people who didn't want to be found. Time to remind him why that was a mistake. The briefing room at Fort Campbell had been converted into a makeshift command center with secure terminals and encrypted communication lines that transformed the sterile space into something that hummed with urgent purpose. When I walked in at 0800 hours, I found 2 people I hadn't expected to see. Abby sat at one of the terminals, her fingers flying across a keyboard as she traced digital pathways through military networks. Her security clearance had been temporarily elevated for this operation, giving her access to systems she'd never seen before. At the adjacent workstation, my father hunched over classified archives, his retired colonel's credentials reactivated for the duration of the investigation. His gray hair caught the fluorescent light as he cross-referenced personnel files with operational timelines. Surprised, Agent Thompson asked, noting my expression. Confused, I replied. Your sister requested to be part of the task force. Said she owed it to you to help clean up the mess she started. Your father volunteered his expertise in personnel security analysis. Director Coleman approved both requests. The room felt smaller with my family in it. 15 years of careful distance collapsed into a space where we couldn't avoid each other, couldn't retreat to separate corners when the conversation got uncomfortable. Dad looked up from his files. Morning, Rachel. Dad. That was it. No warmth, no awkwardness. Just acknowledgement between 2 professionals who happened to share DNA. Thompson briefed us on the overnight developments. Marcus Webb had been traced to a location in Northern Virginia, but the trail went cold at a cyber cafe that had been abandoned for months. He was using sophisticated tradecraft, bouncing his digital signature through multiple proxy servers while staying physically mobile. He's good, I admitted, studying the routing analysis. But he has patterns, behavioral tics that he doesn't realize he's showing. Such as, Abby asked without looking up from her screen. He always creates backup extraction routes, multiple ways out of any digital environment. And he has a paranoia about certain encryption protocols. He'll avoid anything developed after 2018 because he thinks they're compromised. I pulled up a map showing the geographic distribution of his server access points. See this cluster pattern? He's staying within a 30-mile radius of somewhere that matters to him. Probably a safe house or a location with personal significance. Dad grunted approvingly. Good tactical thinking. It was the closest thing to praise I'd received from him in decades. We worked in silence for the next 4 hours, our individual expertise converging on the problem like artillery adjusting fire. Dad's personnel analysis revealed that Marcus had maintained contact with 3 former colleagues who still had active clearances. Abby's network forensics uncovered a pattern of small financial transactions that suggested he was being funded by an external source. My behavioral analysis narrowed his likely location to a 12-square-mile area in rural Virginia. The breakthrough came when Abby cross-referenced the financial data with property records. Got him, she said quietly. Shell company lease on a farmhouse 40 miles west of D.C. Signed 3 months ago, right when the systematic file extraction began. I felt the familiar thrill of a hunt reaching its conclusion. How certain are you? 95%. The financial patterns match, the timeline aligns, and it's within your predicted geographic radius. Thompson was already coordinating with the FBI tactical team for the arrest. But something in Abby's voice made me look at her more closely. She was staring at the screen with an expression I couldn't quite read. What is it? I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, then spoke without turning around. I just wanted them to see me. I thought if you weren't there, maybe I could finally breathe. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and honest, in a way that 15 years of family dinners had never been. You don't have to erase someone else to be seen, I said gently. She finally looked at me, then her eyes bright with something that might have been relief. I know that now. 2 hours later, we watched through a live video feed as FBI agents surrounded the farmhouse where Marcus Webb had been running his operation. He surrendered without resistance, probably knowing that fighting would only make his eventual sentence worse. The debriefing revealed the full scope of his betrayal. 7 classified operations compromised. Dozens of intelligence assets potentially exposed. All because he couldn't accept that someone he considered inferior had been promoted over him. Thompson turned to Abby as we prepared to leave. Lieutenant Colonel Quinn, you'll need to report to your commanding officer tomorrow morning. There will be a formal reprimand in your file for initiating the contact that enabled this breach. It won't affect your current rank, but it will impact future promotion eligibility. Abby straightened her shoulders. I understand. I accept full responsibility for my actions. I watched my sister face the consequences of her choices with dignity and felt something shift in my understanding of who she'd become. Not the jealous little girl who'd tried to tear me down, but a woman learning how to stand up and take accountability for her mistakes. Good work, both of you, Dad said as we walked to our cars. He paused, looking between Abby and me. I'm proud of how you handled this, both of you. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't a reunion, but it was recognition, and sometimes that's enough to build on. The invitation arrived on official NATO letterhead, cream-colored paper with embossed seals, and the kind of formal language that makes simple requests sound like royal decrees. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization cordially invites you to deliver the keynote address at the Advanced Strategic Intelligence Summit. 6 months had passed since Marcus Webb's arrest. 6 months of debriefing, security reviews, and the slow process of rebuilding trust with agencies that had once considered me a potential threat. The invitation was more than a speaking engagement. It was recognition that I belonged in rooms where decisions were made about the future of global security. The summit was held at the National Defense University in an auditorium that seated 400 military officers, intelligence analysts, and defense contractors from across the alliance. As I stood backstage reviewing my notes one final time, I felt the familiar pre-mission calm settle over me. This wasn't about proving myself anymore. It was about sharing what I'd learned in 15 years of operating in the shadows. 5 minutes, ma'am, the stage manager whispered. I nodded and stepped to the wings where I could see the audience through a gap in the curtain. Uniforms from a dozen nations, ribbons and medals catching the auditorium lights. Faces that had seen combat and peacekeeping missions, and the quiet violence of intelligence work. In the front row, third seat from the left, sat Abby. She was in her dress blues, her lieutenant colonel's rank prominent on her shoulders. But something about her posture was different. She wasn't performing confidence or commanding attention. She was simply there, listening, present in a way that felt new. General Martinez, the NATO intelligence coordinator, introduced me with a recitation of achievements that sounded like they belonged to someone else. Operation Pylon Echo, strategic advisory role in the Balkans, instrumental in preventing 3 separate terrorist attacks on European soil. I walked to the podium carrying 15 years of silence and the weight of finally being allowed to speak. Distinguished colleagues, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. I've been asked to talk about leadership in asymmetric warfare, about decision-making under pressure, about the moral complexity of operations that exist in the gray spaces between war and peace. The audience settled into attention notebooks, open, ready to record insights they could take back to their own commands. But I want to start with something simpler, I continued. I want to talk about failure. A ripple of curiosity moved through the room. This wasn't the usual keynote opening. For 15 years, I was considered a failure by the people who mattered most to me. I was the daughter who couldn't handle West Point, the sister who took the easy way out, the soldier who broke under pressure and disappeared rather than face the consequences. I paused, letting the words settle. Some failures are facts. Some are stories told by those who never asked for the truth. I looked directly at Abby, who was watching me with complete attention. The challenge we face in intelligence work isn't just operational, it's personal. We're asked to carry secrets that isolate us from the people we serve. We make sacrifices that can't be explained or celebrated. We succeed in ways that must remain invisible. I spoke for 20 minutes about the moral weight of classified operations, about the psychological cost of protecting societies that could never know what threats had been prevented. I talked about the importance of accountability, even when accountability couldn't be public. Leadership in our field requires a different kind of courage, I said as I approached my conclusion. Not the courage to charge into battle, but the courage to live with the consequences of decisions made in darkness. The courage to be misunderstood. The courage to let others take credit for victories you made possible. The applause was respectful, but measured. These were professionals who understood that real insight came without flourish. Before I concluded, I said I'd like to invite Lieutenant Colonel Abby Quinn to share her perspective on integrity in military service. The room went quiet with surprise. Abby's eyes widened slightly, but she stood without hesitation and made her way to the podium. For a moment she stood silent, gathering her thoughts. When she spoke, her voice was steady but vulnerable. 6 months ago, I thought leadership meant being the loudest voice in the room. I thought success meant proving that others had failed. She paused, looking out at the audience. I was wrong. She talked about the investigation that had brought our family together, about learning to distinguish between personal ambition and professional duty. She spoke honestly about the mistakes she'd made and the lessons she was still learning. Real leadership isn't about being right, she said. It's about being honest, even when that honesty costs you something you thought you wanted. When she finished, the applause was different, warmer. Not the polite recognition of rank or achievement, but genuine appreciation for candor in a world that often rewarded performance over truth. As we left the stage together, Abby touched my arm lightly. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For showing me what dignity looks like. I smiled, not with triumph, but with something quieter. Recognition finally from the person whose opinion had mattered most, when I was young enough to believe that family approval was something you could earn through achievement alone. We walked out of the auditorium side by side, 2 sisters, who had finally learned to see each other clearly. I'm back in my Arlington apartment now, sitting at the same kitchen table where I used to stare at that old family photo every night. The coffee is the same, the morning routine unchanged. But something fundamental has shifted in the quality of the silence around me. The apartment still looks like a place where someone lives temporarily, minimal furniture. No personal photographs on display. Everything arranged for quick departure if necessary. Old habits from 15 years of classified work don't disappear overnight. But now the silence feels different. Not empty, but purposeful. Not hiding, but choosing. My work continues much as it did before. Risk assessment reports, threat analysis, the occasional consultation on operations I can't discuss. I'm still Rebecca Miller to my neighbors, still the woman who works in insurance and keeps to herself. But the weight of that cover identity has lightened somehow. It's become a choice rather than a prison. The phone rings more often now, not just the encrypted lines for work, but my personal number. Abby calls every few weeks, usually with questions about her new assignment at the Pentagon. She's working intelligence analysis now, trying to understand the world I've lived in for so long. Our conversations are careful, professional, but there's something underneath them, a foundation of respect that wasn't there before. Dad sends text messages occasionally, brief updates about his work with the Veterans Affairs Advisory Board, news about Jake's latest deployment. The messages are short, efficient, but they arrive regularly, like a heartbeat, like proof that I exist in his thoughts, even when we're not speaking. Mom's calls are the most surprising. She asks about my health, whether I'm eating enough, if I need anything. The same questions she asked when I was 18 and leaving for West Point, but without the underlying worry that I might not be strong enough for what came next. She knows now that I've been strong enough for things she couldn't have imagined. 3 weeks after the NATO summit, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address, but I recognized Mom's handwriting. Inside was a single photograph, the Quinn family at Jake's promotion ceremony the previous month. We're arranged in the traditional formation, Dad in the center wearing his dress uniform despite being retired. Mom to his right in her navy blue dress, Jake in his captain's bars, Abby in her lieutenant colonel's insignia. And there on the left side of the group is me. Not cropped out, not hidden behind someone else's shoulder, but clearly visible and deliberately included. I'm wearing the same neutral blouse I'd chosen for Abby's ceremony, the one designed not to draw attention. But in this photo, I don't look invisible. I look like someone who belongs there, someone who's earned her place through something more valuable than rank or medals. I propped the photograph on my kitchen counter next to the coffee maker, where I'll see it every morning, not as a shrine to family reconciliation, but as a reminder that some truths are worth the wait it takes to speak them. The story I've told you isn't really about revenge. It's about recognition, the difference between being seen and being truly known. For 15 years, I lived with the assumption that invisibility was the price of serving something larger than myself. That protecting others meant accepting that they might never understand what I'd protected them from. I was wrong about that. Not about the necessity of secrecy, some truths must remain buried to keep people safe, but about the cost of that secrecy. I thought I had to choose between serving my country and being known by my family. What I learned is that real recognition doesn't require full disclosure. It just requires enough trust to believe that someone's actions might be more complex than they appear. Sometimes survival means staying silent, but healing. That begins when you let silence speak the truth. If this story felt like yours, if you've ever sat in the back row of your own life while others told your story for you, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're listening from, or just let me know you're there. You don't need to be seen by everyone, just by someone who knows what to look for. I've spent most of my life in the shadows protecting people who couldn't know they needed protection. Now I'm stepping into whatever light I can find, not because I need applause, but because I've learned that true strength isn't about being invisible. It's about being exactly who you are, especially when that person is more complex than anyone expected. Thank you for listening. Thank you for seeing me. And if you're still hiding in the back row of your own story, maybe it's time to let someone know you're there. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up as yourself.